choices all your life long, you are slowly turning this central thing, which we called your mind, your will, your identity, your character, you are slowly turning this central thing, and I love this, either into a heavenly creature or a hellish creature. Right? We are becoming the product cumulatively of the choices that we make. Yes, DNA has a role to play in that. Yes, the raising, the way that we were raised, of course it does. And God takes all of that into consideration. His grace is sufficient. Right? But at the end of the day, we are making choices, and then our choices are turning around and making us. Gregory Boyd, in his fantastic book, Satan and the Problem of Evil, says, for better or worse, we irreversibly become the decisions we make. I love that. We become the decisions we make. Self-determining freedom is about what morally responsible contingent beings choose to do on their way to becoming or deciding what they are going to permanently be. I love that. Choices are what we do on our way to becoming who we will permanently be. And notice this is a key phrase right here. Self-determining freedom. That actually is the very definition of freedom. Freedom is the power of self-determination. To take a right or to take a left. Right? To stay or to go. It's the power to determine yourself. And so, for example, when we take away people's freedom, for example, in the case of incarceration, we put them into a cell and they cannot decide to do just anything they want to do. We understand that intuitively, and it's just common sense, that to take away somebody's freedom is a punishment. Or it could be a cruelty, like if in the case of slavery. But in the case of incarceration for a wrong done, maybe they've committed a crime and they're dangerous to society, so we take away the freedom, right? And they no longer have the power of self-determination. This is an interesting little point. We're going to come to this in a second, but I'll just bring it out right now because it seems the appropriate time to do it. At the end of all of this great controversy, God will give every single person exactly what they want. Everybody gets what they want. Everybody gets to make their own choice. God will not give anybody anything other than what they're asking for. What they're asking for. And you'll see that. That's going to come out here. All right. A lovely book here called The Spiritual Brain from Mario Beauregard, and I think it's Sherry O'Leary. Leary. In recent years, however, neuroscientists have discovered that the adult brain is actually very plastic. That means malleable, can be changed. As we will see, if neural circuits, that is the circuits in your brain, we've talked about how many there are, if neural circuits receive a great deal of traffic, they will grow. If they receive little traffic, they will remain the same or shrink. The amount of traffic our neural circuits receive depends, for the most part, on what we choose to pay attention to. Not only can we make decisions by focusing on one idea rather than on another, but we can change the patterns of neurons in our brains by doing so consistently. This has been demonstrated by experiments. It's very interesting. They've done, for example, autopsies on the brains of New York taxi cab drivers. And there are certain areas of their brain, maybe the hippocampus, I could be wrong about that, that's just giant compared to people who are not New York City taxi cab drivers. The area of the brain that has to do with spatial awareness is just like much, much larger on long-term New York City taxi cab drivers. Why? Because they're using that area of the brain. They've got this giant, maze-like city out in front of them, and somebody's going to get in at 23rd and Union, and they want to go, to 54th Avenue, and you've got, and those circuits are used again and again and again, cumulatively over their years, and their literal brain structure changes. It's not just a mental thing. In fact, I was telling you, I was telling Jeffrey yesterday, this really interesting book that I've only read a part of, so I can't recommend it yet, but it looked very interesting. It's called The Brain That Heals Itself. Has anyone seen this book or heard of this book? Very interesting. And I read a section in there on music. And they were talking about how what happens with music, one of the most fascinating things that happens with music is that music usually has a prominent rhythm, unless it's like maybe jazz where it's polyrhythmic. But for the most part, music will have some sort of a rhythm, some sort of a pace. And what they think is happening with a lot of people, various mental illnesses, autism, Down syndrome, certain types of other mental illnesses, one of the things that they believe is happening is that the brain is multi-rhythmic. And that it's going at 2 different or 3 different or 100 different patterns. And they have this very interesting therapy that they do where they have some little device, apparently, it was not fully clear to me, that plays like, not music, but it plays like whoa, whoa, whoa. But it, you sort of stick it in the ear and it becomes, you adjust to it, like you adjust to your clothes, or you adjust to, the house that I live in right now is fairly close to the highway. And the first night I stayed in that house, I said, oh, Violetta, we've made a terrible mistake. The road noise is terrible here. I won't be able to live here. And now I don't even notice it. I have to really pay attention, like, okay, where is that road noise? Because I'm so adjusted to it. Well, anyway, so apparently they have this little woo devicey thing that they put in certain kinds of people, and it basically fixes their mental problems. Because the brain is like going in this rhythm, and this rhythm, and this rhythm. It's going in all these different rhythms, and they put this thing auditorily into the brain through the ear that causes the brain, in the same way that when you're standing there and you hear a song come on and you start tapping your foot, you're just automatically, and you just start tapping away. Your brain adapts to that rhythm, right? And it starts, very interesting. And it's this whole idea about how the brain, we can do certain, it's not all about music, it's just about the brain heals itself, the brain changes itself. This is huge shift in the thinking about the nature of the brain in the last 40 years, because it used to be believed that the formative years, how many of you have heard that term before? The formative years was when a child was very young, right? And there still is a sense in which the highest level of plasticity, neuroplasticity, is when a child is very young. That's why you can teach, there are children that are, fluent in like 5 languages and they're 7 years old. It's amazing, it's astonishing. Or piano or other things. There is greater plasticity when you're young, but one of the great revelations of modern neuroscience is how plastic the adult brain is. It's astonishing, and that's what Beauregard and O'Leary are saying here, is that you can change not just your mind but the structure of your brain. And they say how? By, look at this, by what we choose to pay attention to. No wonder it says in Psalm 101 verse 3, I will set no wicked thing before my eyes. We pay attention to evil, we become evil. 2 Corinthians 3:18. By beholding, we become changed. Just a word on that, a fascinating little word. There are 2 videos that represent some research that's quite interesting to me that are up on my Facebook page. You can also just look them up on YouTube. One is called The Demise of Guys. And then there's that's by Philip Zimbardo, who wrote a book called The Lucifer Effect, How Good People Turn Bad. And then another one, I don't remember who it was, but it's called The Great Porn Experiment. And it's very interesting because both of these are totally secular sources. They're not religious, they're not Christian, they're not coming from any sort of moral perspective on the situation that we have in porn right now. But what they say is very interesting. They say that something is taking place with the massive, what they call the Great Porn Experiment, the pornification of culture, in which porn now, because of the internet, is so accessible, so ubiquitous, and it's frankly mainstream now. It used to be sort of a fringy, seedy, and now it's like very mainstream. It's just like in the know. It's right there. It's immediately accessible, and frankly, a lot of these, teen pop stars, man, they're just basically porn stars. Miley Cyrus, Nicki Minaj, I don't know all of them, Katy Perry. I mean, these guys are it's very pornographic in just the way that they conduct themselves. Okay, now here's the interesting thing. So in the Great Porn Experiment, they talk about how they went to a series of colleges, universities, and they were trying to conduct experiments on the effect of pornography, the massive intake of pornography on the male mind, and especially at colleges. So what they tried to do is they tried to set up an experiment where they could compare non-porn using males to porn using males and test them over a series of different measurements. And one of the things he talks about in this YouTube video, you need to watch it, The Great Porn Experiment, it was a TED Talk, is that they couldn't find a large enough sample group at any of the universities that they went to of males who were not regularly viewing pornography. So they couldn't even perform the experiment with a control group, right? And one of the things that's emerged, and this is what comes out in Zimbardo's book about the demise of guys, is that men are apparently wired, and it's no secret, for variety. Right, and that's one of the sort of massive attractions of pornography, is that you can have, like, blonde or dark hair or tall or short or skinny or more voluptuous. You can just sort of, you can have this and then this and then this and then this and then this. And it doesn't come with all of the, you don't have to deal with a person. With a human being that has headaches and menstruates and is angry or upset or sad, right? You just, this whole thing. Now here's the fascinating thing. This is why it matters from a secular point of view, and this is where I'm going with this, is that it's literally changing the way that men relate to actual women. And there's this concern, a sociological secular concern and a psychological secular concern that the massive pornification of culture is incapacitating a whole generation of males from being able to enter into an actual, and I'm saying males here because males are far and away the most common users of porn, women as well, but it's like 30% versus like 90+%, are losing the capacity to interact. The brain is being changed. So now you're presented with like a real person that wants to have her hand held or sit down, go on a walk through the park or whatever, and they're just like brain equals broken, right? And what's happening here? They're viewing the same thing. Brain is changing. The brain is not this static, hard, fixed reality. It's a malleable, morphable, plastic, elastic reality that becomes adapted to what we put in front of our eyes. And it's fascinating to me that this is, because for a long time it was Christians, books like Every Man's Battle and Not Even a Hint that were raising concerns about the moral implications of, the glut of availability of pornography. But now it's secularists that are saying, yeah, there's a danger here. There's a massive danger here with the utter ubiquity because there's a whole generation of people that are growing up, and this is the new normal. And in my own church, it's fascinating. In my own church, if you're younger than 20, and some of you in this room are, the world that you're growing up in, if you're older than 20, let me say it that way. If you're older than 20, the world that you are growing up in is a totally different world than the people that are under 20 is growing up in terms of the way they communicate, the way they interact, the whole social media phenomenon, the texting phenomenon, the sexting phenomenon, all of this, it's a totally different world. And it's programming people, frankly, to be massively narcissistic, massively selfish, and massively not the people that God created us to be. And I'll say one final word on this. When Eve was created, there was only one woman. And when Adam saw Eve, check this out, this is awesome. Eve was Adam's standard for beauty. Because at that point, there was no variety. It's like, man, she's beautiful. And that became the standard. And in a sense, though I don't believe that there's only one that we could marry, I think that God gives us principles, and there's many dozens of people that we could all, we could each be married to and be happily married, because we marry on principle, not some starry-eyed Hollywood version of there's only one for you. Okay, but having said that, when we do find the one that's for you, that person then becomes your Eve and your Adam, your standard for beauty. And a really cool thing happens here. You will be totally, perfectly, completely, 100% satisfied with that one person if you allow yourself to be. It's absolutely amazing. But you can train the brain to be dissatisfied. Man, and God has built us, and man, we spent a little time on this the other day in the break. God has built us for a relationship of connection, a relationship of depth, in which the sexual component, and to me this is the great crime of pornography, is that it's the dehumanization of the sex act. It's the total divorcing of a human person that has dreams and hopes and desires and ambitions and fears. Phooey on all that. It just becomes mechanical. I actually tweeted this the other day. If sin is primarily physical, if sex is primarily physical and mechanical rather than relational and spiritual, we've missed the whole point. Right? We missed the whole point. It's epic. So what's happening here in people like Beauregard and others in this book that I'm talking about, The Brain That Heals Itself, there's a real concern for what Seventh-day Adventists and Bible-believing Christians have been saying for a long time, that the forehead, the character, is the place where the seal of God, which is contained in, which is basically his law, which is his love, will be placed right here. I forgot to get you that quotation about Lucifer. I'll get it on the break.